The Zarlum Chronicles, Episode 1, Part 5. They went to go into the house. However, most of the entrance and exits were destroyed. Despite this, they managed to find an entrance through the triple garage. Before they entered, Amoura turned to Magpie.
You want to enter first?
Magpie thought for a moment, then shook her head.
I'm many things in this world, kid. But sentimental, I am not. I'll be in the car. I just wanted to see the outside one more time. The inside is all yours.
Magpie went over to the car, sitting against it. Amoura asked Raven,
Do you think she's all right?
Raven sighed.
I don't think she's been all right a day in her life. That's too big a problem for us to fix.
Amoura and Raven climbed up and entered through a small window, seeing the garage was empty. However, it used to have 3 cars. The first was a black and red Dodge Challenger, which they used for just driving around. The second was a Mercedes S-Class, which they used for business. The last was a classic black and red Chevrolet Corvette, which was driven by one of the house members, and she loved everything about it. But all the cars were gone. However, they knew where the Mercedes was. It was upside down just down the street. They think the other 2 were parked outside a hospital miles away, where Amoura was born. However, they were never able to get over to the hospital to check. It was simply too dangerous. The room looked old and damp. They believed a pipe above the ceiling had burst, spreading water everywhere. As a result of this, vines and weeds were bleeding through the floor all over the room like a giant set of veins. Amoura turned, helping Raven get through the small window. Raven thanked her, dusting off her hand, noticing a shelf in the corner that had been full of chemicals had been tipped over, and the chemicals covered the floor. Amoura went over to the door into the main house, being unable to open it because it was sealed by plants. She tried to push her body against it, but it wouldn't give way. She turned to Raven.
Could you come give me a hand? This door is really stiff.
She nodded, walking forward.
Sure.
They both put their bodies against it. All right, 3, 2, 1, push! They pushed against it for a few seconds, until with a loud scraping sound, it finally got pushed open, throwing dust, shooting up everywhere, and light flooded into the room. When the dust finally settled, they saw the main room that the gang would have hung out in most during the day. The first area was just an entrance room, which led up the large main room from 2 steps. The right side was the kitchen. The left side was the living room, with the same brown-colored walls all around, split by the floor because the kitchen had wooden floors and the living room had carpet. The reason they chose brown walls was because they wanted a nice, warm, inviting environment all around, which surprisingly worked very well. Amoura looked at the kitchen. It used to have dark brown cabinets with black countertops, in a half square with a large kitchen table in the middle, accompanied by 4 chairs. The oven was right in the center with a microwave in the right corner, and a kettle with tea and coffee making supplies to hand. The fridge was on the right at the end of the counter opposite the sink. Above were cabinets attached to the walls, some with glass window areas to see the plates inside. It was a beautiful kitchen. However, now it was completely destroyed, all supplies licked clean. Some doors had even been removed entirely. The table and fridge were upside down with the chairs scattered all around the room, even on the counter. 4 of the wall-mounted cabinets had fallen down, making shattered plates and cups go everywhere all over the hardwood floor, which had been chipped and was not as clean as it once was. Amoura smiled, knowing her mother would be ripping her way out her grave if she knew how damaged her floor had become just to fix it. The walls had large holes, and the paint was peeling everywhere. The living room had thick, comfortable carpet because the owners loved to walk around barefoot or in socks. The brown leather sofa was now destroyed. It once faced a TV. However, the TV had a cracked screen laying on the ground. The room was full of mess and broken glass everywhere. so they could constantly hear the sound of glass cracking under their boots. The ceiling had completely collapsed, so bricks were also everywhere. Raven went to a switch in the corner, attempting to turn the lights on however the power was out.
Yeah, not that surprising. Amoura nodded.
Yeah, they did have their own independent supply, but they unplugged that and tried to use it for the city, but it then went dark, so yeah, no power.
Raven went over to one of the chairs, seeing the leg had come off and had rolled away. I bet this place would have looked good in its prime. You know, in the old days, before everything. Amoura nodded, looking up at the large hole in the ceiling.
They really loved this place. My mom would always keep this place as clean as possible. It was her OCD. Wonder where I got that from. It was better than where they were living before. This place...
Where were they living? Amoura shrugged.
No idea. It was just something my mother used to say to me.
They looked around. Raven went over to the corner, seeing a chair next to a bookshelf with old-looking books. Raven leaned down. Who used this area? Amoura went over, smiling.
This was used by one of my mothers, Oswin. She would sit here and read. However, from what my other mother said, she was never able to do it without being interrupted by something stupid. That something stupid was almost always Estella.
Raven frowned. Like what, other than Estella?
Well, Estella, the dog, the hyena, the fact they would have to go somewhere on a mission. There was apparently one time she was trying to listen to music and lost one of her earphones. She spent 10 minutes looking for it, only for it to turn up in her ear.
Raven laughed. That's funny. Amoura nodded.
Yeah.
They both went over to a door in the middle of the back room. They creaked it open, seeing a staircase up to the second floor. They went up listening just in case they heard a creature or a person. Luckily, they didn't. Amoura and Raven arrived at a landing and pushed a door open, hearing the sound of the door hit off the wall. This was one of the bedrooms. In the center of the room was a massive hole with a large queen-sized bed almost falling through the floor. Half the room was a dark red, while the other half was a dark purple, being perfectly split in the middle, with some foam panels on the walls in the corner, which used to be an office area. However, the desk had disappeared, leaving only the trivia stuff behind. 2 shelves had collapsed, sending bits of trivia and books everywhere. Amoura leaned down, picking up one of the destroyed pop vinyls on the floor. Its arm had been taken off, and its head was slightly turned to the right, the spring moving it slightly.
They used to love collecting these. They had bloody thousands of them.
In the corner of the room were 2 wardrobes, which surprisingly were still in good conditions with destroyed clothes inside, but the outside was in almost perfect condition. Between them was an upside-down keyboard, which used to be played a lot. However, now it was destroyed, the keys scattered everywhere. Raven looked around. So this was your mother's room?
Yeah, they loved it in here.
Amoura went over to the bed.
This is where they slept for years. I just thought about it. I was conceived in this bed. I think it was this bed.
Raven smiled. I must admit, that is one big bed.
Oh, it needed to be. Trust me on that one. You don't create this level of awesomeness with a little bed.
Raven and Amoura giggled, then left the room together, closing the door like they were closing the door on Delilah, and Oswin's memories putting them to sleep. They went over to the other room. This room was very different. It had a bed, wardrobe, and desk like the other room, but the room was painted black. Across the left wall were black and silver metal playing cards, which had been stuck to the walls in a pattern, like someone threw a deck of cards because the person liked it. The walls would usually be covered in records and swords, however they had been hid all over the floor, along with a large pirate ship wheel laying on the ground spinning back and forth slightly, like it was still on the ocean. Raven went over to it.
Why did she have a ship wheel?
Amoura smiled at the sight of it.
Estella was obsessed with pirates. In fact, she had been a pirate before she met the others.
Raven looked at her. Estella was a pirate and a criminal, then became an anti-hero with Night Spider and Blackbird. Jesus. Amoura nodded.
Yeah, I was just as amazed as you. She used to say, "It's remarkable how often criminals and pirate coincide."
Amoura looked around.
This room really does show everything about who she was.
Yeah. From the stories you told me, it's hard to believe it all happened to one person.
I know, right? But that's who she was.
They went upstairs to the 3rd floor. They went into a room the door of which had been removed from the hinges, and strangely enough, they couldn't actually see where the door had gone. They entered, seeing shelves everywhere, and hundreds of pop vinyl scattered everywhere, all of which were sadly destroyed. A lifetime of collecting thrown all over the floor. Raven shook her head. People are really sick bastards. Like, seriously, to do something like this, it's just madness. All of it is like, Jesus. Amoura nodded.
Exactly. My mother used to dust all these down. It would take her hours. Oswin made shelves, which would push them forward when she entered the room. I swear, she built something for literally everything.
They went out the room, Amoura explained.
Now, this last room is a bit of a sad one for me.
Why? They went into it seeing a cute room. It had blue walls, and someone had done some art of bubbles and fish on the wall. Toys were everywhere, and in the corner was a cute little cot. Surprisingly, the room looked almost entirely untouched. Time hadn't laid a finger on it. It was just left as a constant reminder to Amoura. Amoura looked a little sad, stepping over a chest which would have been full of toys if they weren't all over the floor. Amoura gulped.
This was the room that I would have stayed in if time had been a little more kind.
This looks really cute. Raven noticed a white and pink blanket on the floor, picking it up. Amoura smiled, taking it from her.
That's a nice blanket. How is it in this good of a condition?
I don't know. The whole room is like that. Good condition. You should take the blanket, though. Amoura looked down at it.
Why?
Memories. Just to remember what life could have been. Constantly in your pocket. Amoura thought about it for a moment, then put it in her bag.
That's a perfect idea! Now I have one more thing to show you that took me years to find. They hid it very well.
What is it?
It's how my parents were able to be Night Spider and Blackbird.
Sounds pretty cool. Do they have a bat cave? Amoura smiled.
Sort of. Come and see.
They both left the room to forever sit unchanged and unused. They went downstairs. When they got to the bottom floor, Amoura went to a door which led into a small cleaning cupboard. Raven looked confused. Wow, Night Spider and Blackbird worked out of a cupboard? Amoura nodded.
Oh, but this is the best cupboard ever. Come on, step in.
Raven stepped in the cupboard. It's a bit, intimate in here. Amoura frowned.
Intimate? What does that mean?
Raven smiled. I'll explain when you're older. Amoura nodded.
Right.
Amoura pressed a button on the boiler disguised as a normal button. However, nothing happened. Amoura pressed it again. However, it still didn't do anything. Raven frowned. Does it usually take time or something? Amoura shook her head.
No, it's, that's embarrassing. Usually an elevator would come up here and take us down, but there is no power, so that's not going to happen.
Amoura stepped forward and pulled at a small gap in the back wall, eventually pulling open a door, seeing the elevator wasn't there. Amoura climbed down and into the basement. She turned and helped Raven get in. They saw the room was still in perfect condition, because no one had climbed down there before other than Amoura. It was like stepping directly into the past. It even had lights. They really lived the rich life under the ground because they didn't want to show off. The basement had a TV room, an actual fully working bar, an arcade, and many other rooms. Amoura picked up a movie laying on the ground, gently placing it on the TV stand, looking around.
There have been a lot of memories in here. None of mine.
Raven went to the corner. Oh my god, they had a steam room and a hair salon in their basement?
Yeah, and they built it, not bought it. They also have a gym and changing rooms. They have offices. It's really cool down here.
This is the biggest house I've ever stood in.
Yeah, and it gets even more advanced.
Raven frowned. How can it get advanced?
I will just try to find it. I haven't been here in a while.
Amoura started strangely feeling the walls while Raven explored. Raven then saw the spare bedroom. Why do they have a fucking vault down here? She pulled the giant metal door open, seeing the large metal room inside. It was strange. Inside, the room was a bed and living supplies. Did they have a prisoner down here? She stepped inside, looking around, then saw a massive fist print in the wall. 3 times the size of a normal fist mark, indented into the gray metal. Raven put her fist to it to see the size difference. Jesus, she muttered. Whatever caused it must have had a massive amount of strength to cause that mark. She then looked at the door, which was of course open. What if whatever caused that mark managed to get out of the cell and was now out there somewhere? But if that happened, wouldn't it have to have got out of the basement? Amoura yelled from the next room. I found it! Raven stepped out the vault. She went to Amoura, who was standing in front of 2 metal doors trying to pry them apart. She gestured to Raven.
Could you help me out?
Sure. They both pulled in the door until one of them finally opened. Normally, they would open automatically. However, the house didn't have enough power. They began walking down the 3 steps that lead into a corridor that used to have yellow lights across the top and bottom of the walls. However, they were now black. They opened the other doors at the end of the corridor, going down the 5 metal steps into a massive cave that they called the Night Cave. Amoura smiled.
I love how they always made jokes about how much of a stupid name this was.
The cave was full of platforms. Some areas were in the main cave being connected by platforms and held up by huge metal supports and wires. Raven looked fascinated. What is this place?
It's the Night Cave where they did missions and hid their lives.
I assume this place wouldn't normally be this dark. They were having to look around the area with torches. Amoura nodded.
Yeah, the platforms would have lights on the sides, and there were stage lights on the ground and on the ceiling everywhere, so they could see very well.
They started walking down the platforms, looking around.
I don't know why, but I can just imagine my mother working in here on her lab stuff. She worked in here more than my other mother and Estella did. She spent about 5 hours in here every day, just creating amazing new stuff. It was just her hobby. She never thought of it as a job. In fact, none of them thought of it as a job, apart from Estella. Sort of. It gets very complicated when you go down that argument.
They went to the right of the doors. She went up 6 metal stairs to a platform full of tools and a massive desk full of bits of metal and wires. The platform was in an octagon shape and was covered in science equipment. Amoura could somehow see her mother sitting at one of the bar stools around the desk with her goggles on, welding away at metal. Amoura pulled the goggles up her forehead, smiling, knowing where they came from. They went to the other side, seeing a similar platform with gun walls covered in ordinary items. Amoura looked around, interested.
This is where my mom created all her amazing inventions, including the suits.
What are those on the walls? Asked Raven, pointing at the wall covered in items.
They're the stuff she made, but I wouldn't touch them. From what people have told me, they may be dangerous.
Raven grabbed a lighter.
How bad could this be? It's just a lighter.
She flicked it open, getting ready to light it. However, it started beeping. A red light started flashing, getting faster and faster. Amoura looked worried.
Maybe get rid of it quickly? You never know what could happen next.
All right, whatever.
said Raven, throwing it into the cave. Suddenly, it made a massive explosion, shaking the whole room and making rocks fall from the ceiling. Amoura stood back up.
Okay. Jesus Christ, everything in here could be a hand grenade.
Raven laughed. What about this newspaper?
No, that could be a nuclear bomb for all we know.
She then caught an idea from thin air.
I tell you what, we will take some of these. They could be useful to us. We just need to work out what they do.
How do we do that?
Amoura shook her head.
I don't know. Maybe we should just leave them alone. Or maybe we could test them on Magpie.
I don't think she would approve. She gets very pissy when I shoot her.
Amoura looked at her.
To be fair, you are shooting her, so it does make a lot of sense.
They went back down the steps to the walkways, beginning to walk to the enormous center platform. This was the same shape as the previous. However, it was bigger and had steps all around it, so it was raised higher and was accessible from all angles. Amoura noticed it had a huge glowing white spider web on the ground, which was lighting up the platform. It had a strange desk in the middle, being the huge handles desk. However, it was more advanced than the one at the cabin could ever be, because it could make holograms of buildings and help them with missions, all of which were very important. And surrounding the desk were thin walls covered in screens, 5 going up and 4 going across with 7 walls, so it was a lot of screens. Barriers went around the outside so no one fell off. They only installed them after the 4th time they fell off. After the 4th time Estella fell off, she just never learned. Why wouldn't they do it after the 1st time? No one knows. In the corners were chairs so people could sit down and have meetings about missions. Raven frowned, running her finger across the screen, pulling the dust like snow. She rubbed her fingers together, trying to get rid of it. She looked around, a little confused.
What was this area for? Amoura tried to turn it on, to no avail.
I think these were the screens that connected to hundreds of cameras around the city. Each screen would have 4 cameras, and handles would watch over all of them at the same time.
Raven raised her eyebrows. This is how they were always able to show up at a crime minutes after it happened. By watching the whole city. Amoura nodded.
Yeah, exactly. They were really smart. They never watched private areas, just government cameras.
Raven then realized, wait a moment, isn't this illegal? Amoura nodded.
Yes, it was. But they believed it was for the greater good. And the government did exactly the same thing, so they didn't see a problem with it. However, they said they had to have rules with it. They strictly kept to businesses, never homes. People deserved their privacy. The government didn't. They watched people's security cameras. The team believed that just because there are criminals everywhere, that does not mean that people had to give up their freedom.
Raven nodded. That's why they were different to the police.
They wanted to change the police, and they did. They saw the corruption in the police force.
Raven nodded. Well, yeah, if there are bad people in the police, then other people lose their faiths and beliefs. And that causes vigilantes. Amoura nodded.
Exactly. And they fought for such a long time to fix everything.
Amoura put her hand on the table.
This is the most advanced handles desk in the world.
Did you build another one? Asked Raven, opening a panel on the side, seeing all the wires. If so, then you are really smart. Having no idea how to do it, it doesn't exactly come with a manual.
Actually, no. There was a manual. Oswin always had a book with every invention she ever made, including one of these. I didn't build it. However, I found another one in another room and just fixed it. I still have the book with every invention ever.
Raven smiled. That's amazing. This is a massive operation.
Suddenly, Handles took over the desk.
Oh yes, it was a huge operation, and they saved the day. So often it was unbelievable.
I thought you couldn't connect to this desk because of the power,
said Amoura, looking shocked.
It has a power source inside it, the most powerful in the world. The problem was the signal. But without everyone crying out for help, I can take over again. I just can't use the holograms, which is unfortunate. I'd love to be able to see again.
Amoura frowned.
What happens if you try? If you have power to take it over? Can you make a hologram?
Handles paused.
I can't turn on the face. However, hang on. With a little bit of jiggery-pokery...
Handles turned the top of the metal desk blue as the hologram of the city came up.
Wow,
Said Raven, looking awestruck.
this should be impossible.
They did a lot of impossible things. It was sort of their thing.
They went down the corridor going through the double door, having to pull them apart as a team because of the power. They went down the small corridor up to a metal door, which was already opened by Amoura a long time ago. Inside the room were 2 glass cases, big enough for a person to stand in because the suits used to sit in there. However, they were empty. Normally, the ground and ceiling would be glowing. However, there was no power, of course. Amoura went to the glass cases.
You know, when I first arrived, the suits were actually in here, but in front of them was a sort of stand with a watch. So I took both watches and the suits went inside. I've been trying to fix them. However, my mother was clearly a hell of a lot smarter than I am.
Why? How are they broken?
Well, I think they were biolocked to them, or anyone who had the same DNA. But that can't be right because I would be able to wear them, but I can't. It must be something to do with the power. Hopefully one day I can fix them. It would be really cool to have them again. They'd help with survival.
Raven nodded, then went to the other side of the metal doors. Amoura turned to it.
Oh, that's just the corridor they leave out of when they have a mission. I tried to open it, but couldn't. I think the corridor could get the armor off them when the mission was finished, but I don't actually know. Oswin did make some arms to take the suits off, but never said where she actually put them. Oswin did keep a book of her inventions, but she did not keep a diary.
Raven frowned. They didn't keep, diaries of everything they did?
She had her invention diary, but no mission diary or anything like that. I don't think they ever thought to do so, if I'm honest. I don't think they ever thought the fact they might die and someone would have to take over. Or maybe they did. I'm just not sure who they would want to take over after them. Oswin planned for everything, but I don't think she planned for that.
Raven frowned. Why wouldn't they do that?
Maybe they just never thought they would die. Or they thought that if they had died, who would be powerful enough to take over in a moment's notice?
Amoura turned, pointing down the corridor.
Over there is another door which I can't open. I think there were robots in there.
Raven frowned. What were the robots for?
I don't know. Crowd control, I think? I do know they made a bunch of drones which would fix the damage the missions would cause, so the city didn't have to. And if anyone's car was damaged, they didn't have to go down insurance for something that wasn't her fault. My mother was nice like that.
Raven went to the door. Then how do you know there are robots in here? Amoura pointed, smiling.
That sign? Right there.
Raven looked up. What sign? Amoura giggled.
Made you look. It would be pretty stupid for them to build this, then add directions. So it was actually in a book my mother seemed to have drawn out a plan of what the place would look like. She didn't have a book about missions, but she did have that.
Very helpful.
Of course.
They went out, the room going to the room opposite. However, they couldn't open the door, so they moved on, wondering what could be inside.
The plans don't mention some rooms, so I have no idea what's in there. They must have been drawn up, then things were added later.
They went out the room, closing the doors, then went back to the handles desk and went down the opposite platform to another metal door, opening it together. Amoura and Raven went through another door into a huge room, which was probably the craziest room in the underground. It was an army room. The first vehicle in the room was just a simple army jeep. that they only kept because Estella liked it. It was never even used for missions, it was just used for fun. However, that was nothing to the massive Black Army tank next to it. And next to that was a cargo helicopter. Next to that was a Ford Mustang, which had an incredible amount of upgrades, basically their version of a Batmobile. The vehicles had a tunnel that they had to drive through to get out. However, the helicopter could fly out of the massive helipad doors above that used to open automatically. However, now they don't, so the helicopter would never be used because the doors are simply too heavy to lift, and they couldn't fly it anyway. Amoura went to the Jeep.
Why did they ever buy this Jeep? What would they ever have used it for?
However, Raven looked awestruck by the Jeep. She opened the door, sitting in it, smiling at it.
What? What is it? What do you mean, what is it? My God, look at this thing.
Raven looked shocked.
Do you not know what this is?
Amoura shook her head, wondering what it could possibly be to make Raven so excited. Raven informed her,
This is a genuine 1907 police and army Jeep used during World War I and II, in pristine condition.
How do you know?
asked Amoura, looking at it. Raven got out, looking excited.
I used to be really into old army and police vehicles, and I can tell what this is. Look, this compartment just above the fuel tank would hold parking tickets or bullets. It was great.
Amoura smiled.
Very different things.
Raven nodded.
I know, great, isn't it?
Raven closed the compartment, circling the Jeep, looking at all the small details.
I love this. Here parents had great taste and a heavy bank account. This would have cost the whole damn cheese factory. No wonder they didn't use it. They kept this around just because they could.
Amoura frowned.
My parents didn't work in a cheese factory.
Raven smiled.
No, I mean, it's a phrase that means like money. People call it cheese.
I have never heard anyone call it cheese.
Raven nodded.
Well, to be fair, you have only seen me and Magpie for years, and before that, all you saw was your mother and aunt and their friends. You've never had to deal with money before.
Amoura nodded.
Yeah, fair enough.
Meanwhile, outside, Magpie was sitting against the front bumper of the Jeep, reading a newspaper she found on the ground. She was doing the crosswords when she felt something. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up like a sixth sense kicking into action, and with thousands of years of evolution, she wouldn't be surprised if she did have a sixth sense. Magpie glanced around her for any signs of movement at all. She couldn't die, however she could get hurt. And she had enough of getting hurt for 800 million lifetimes, because she thinks that's how long she's lived for, but just wasn't sure. But that didn't matter to her at that moment. The sense heightened like a temperature. She felt someone or something watching her from a distance. She just couldn't tell which distance and which direction it was coming from. She grabbed the heavy handle of her sharp, long sword, not removing it from the sheath, still glancing around everywhere in a circle like the light of a lighthouse looking for the slightest, tiniest movement. Magpie knew what to do. She slowly removed her sword from her sheath with a loud scraping sound, holding it with both hands, holding it close to her face, feet far apart, prepared for any action at all, but still didn't know if there would be any action at all. It suddenly dawned on her that maybe it was just a feeling. She had been in so many battles and wars, killing so many people, that maybe she's just stuck in that constant mode of attack. That was the only life she ever knew. It could have just been some animal, but if it was an animal, she would know it for sure. She was waiting for something, anything to happen. The slightest sound or movement to tell her something was going to happen. But there was just nothing. The silence was almost making a loud sound, which strangely told her that something was coming. She hoped Amoura and Raven would hurry up so they could leave. She didn't want to go get them because someone could take the car. and they would be really screwed. So she had to just stay put and wait in fear and suspense, wondering what would happen. Meanwhile, in the cave, Amoura and Raven went to the next room, which was the most advanced room in the house. It was a massive space station. In the corner was the control center. In the very center was a massive stand with stairs going to where the rocket would be placed, and cranes around able to lift the things around like the rockets. They decided to base it under the ground, because if something went wrong and the rocket flies down, they would be under the ground. And if it blew up, no one on the surface would be hurt. And they wouldn't be hurt because they were in the protected control center. No one ever got hurt, and they only crashed 3 times, which, considering how dangerous space missions were, that wasn't actually too bad. Raven looked around, looking fascinated.
They had a fucking space station?
Yeah, they had a satellite as well.
Why?
Handels explained to me that they had to make the blueprint of the buildings, and they could make the blueprints with people moving around, so they could solve crimes easier. To do that, they had a satellite constantly watching down on the city.
That's actually amazing. Amoura nodded.
Yeah. It was also amazingly illegal.
Raven frowned. Illegal?
Oh yeah. According to the laws of Zarlum, space around Zarlum and its moons is owned by the Queen. So people aren't allowed to send anything into space without her permission. And of course they didn't have her permission. There is something stupid about that law.
Raven nodded. Yeah, the whole thing is stupid. The Queen can't just own space.
Yeah, but the stupidest thing is that they say you can send something up and make it go past the moons, and that's legal. However, to put anything in that zone, you have to, of course, go through the Queen's zone, which is illegal. It's really stupid.
Of course. And anyone who puts their stuff in the Queen zone gets arrested for 20 years anyway. Amoura nodded.
Yeah, that's a bit steep. I wonder why they were trying to protect space so much. That's weird.
Raven looked around. It does make me wonder how no one ever noticed they were Night Spider and Blackbird when they had a space station. Like, didn't the neighbors think, that's weird. Rockets and helicopters are taking off. That's not a normal neighbor activity. Amoura shook her head.
No, they never noticed. Oswin built a sort of perception filter.
A perception filter? So the house from the outside couldn't be seen?
No, that would be too obvious if people couldn't see a house. It's more complicated than that. They can see the house just fine, but whenever a helicopter takes off or a rocket or something like that, it's not that the people can't see it. They just can't recognize that they can see it.
Raven frowned. How is that not the same thing? How does that work? Amoura shrugged.
I don't know.
Meanwhile, upstairs, Magpie was standing in the middle of the front yard looking around. She was slowly spinning around, trying to tell where it was coming from. She closed her eyes, trying to close off her other senses. She then heard a voice behind her.
Ah, closing off senses. You were very good at that back in the day.
Magpie spun round fast. She swiftly threw her sword up high, blocking the blade of a woman wearing full black clothes with metal shoulder, elbow, hip, knee, and ankle pads, and a black helmet covering her entire head. So Magpie had no idea who his person was. Magpie used her right hand to push her back a little, then blocked her hit low and kicked her away, swinging her sword in her hand, observing the person. Magpie jumped forward a little.
Why attack me, asshole? The woman snarled.
Why do you think?
Magpie shrugged. How should I know? I don't even know who you are.
Magpie began the next assault, quickly swinging her sword towards the woman's throat. The woman blocked Magpie, then kicked her away. They began slashing swords extremely quick. Their swords clashed at least twice a second, both being extreme sword masters. However, Magpie knew there was no way the woman was going to win. You can't beat infinity in a fight. Their swords slammed together. Magpie started pushing her sword forward, trying to cut the woman's neck with the woman's own sword. The woman kicked Magpie's knee, causing a loud crack. Magpie recoiled in pain, stepping back.
Oh, fuck! Motherfucker! You dirty twat!
The woman spun round, swinging her sword towards Magpie's head. Magpie swiftly dodged, but not enough, because a strand of her white hair came off, falling to the ground. Magpie felt her hair where it had come off.
You complete arsewipe! You're going to fucking pay for that, bitch!
Magpie jumped forward, and they began fighting again, even quicker than before. Magpie was hitting her sword against the other so hard she thought it would snap. They were fighting so quick, sparks flew from the middle of their swords like beams of sunlight. Magpie was pushing the woman backwards as they moved. Suddenly, the woman kicked Magpie through the fence, causing her to roll over, landing on her chest. She looked up as the woman quickly ran on top of the gate, swinging her sword high. Magpie saw her sword a few feet away. She swiftly rolled on right shoulder to her head, over to her other shoulder, grabbing the handle of her sword as she did. She rolled onto her side, swinging the sword as she did. When she was finally upright, she blocked a swing, high standing on one knee. Magpie stood up.
All right, let's go again, bitch. Let's fucking go!
Meanwhile, downstairs, Amoura and Raven were unaware of them fighting upstairs, so they continued exploring, going into a room full of metal shelves. There used to be canned food all over them, but Amoura had already taken them. In the corner was an armored vehicle, which could go through the tunnel which connected to the army area tunnel, both leading to the surface. However, it was too big and way too fuel costly for them to drive. Raven looked a little confused.
How did they build this whole room in the outbreak? Amoura nodded.
I wondered that the first time I came down here. However, Handles explained to me that they were paranoid and created this room just in case something happened and they couldn't beat it.
Did they really think that little of themselves? Amoura shook her head.
No, I just think they thought the missions they were doing were getting harder and harder and harder. They were terrified that one day they would fight in a mission that they couldn't fight and would have no other choice than to survive. And that did happen. So maybe they were right about that.
Raven sighed. I mean, it makes sense. They kept making their armor better and better, and making their weapons stronger. It's like if the police started using handguns for everything, the criminals would use AKs. If the police used AKs, the criminals would start using anti-tank missiles. It was just a matter of time until they ended the world.
Yeah, I still don't think it was their fault, but I see why people do think that.
Yeah, I believe it was partly their fault. But mostly, it was the fault of a government that didn't give two shits about their people and safety, to the point where they had to step in and be the hero to begin with. Meanwhile, the fight above was only getting worse.
End of episode 1, part 5.